I wouldn't exactly call it a forest. It was more like a sparse cluster of trees, scattered enough to allow faint glimpses of the night sky yet dense enough to block the passage of vehicles. We parked in a small gravel lot nearby and stepped out into the freezing air. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. Even with layers of scarves, gloves, and padded jackets, the chill seeped through, biting into our skin as we began our walk toward the lake. The crunch of snow underfoot was the only sound breaking the eerie silence. Eric and Noah, my two closest friends, walked a few paces ahead of me. They both lit cigarettes, the flickers of their lighters briefly illuminating their faces in the dark. I've never smoked, never felt the need, but I've grown used to the faint, acrid smell lingering around them. Their laughter mingled with the occasional puff of smoke, momentarily lightening the oppressive atmosphere of the night. It was probably past midnight, though I couldn't be certain. Out here, time felt irrelevant. All I knew was that we seemed to be the only souls in existence. No animals, no distant headlights, not even the rustle of wind through the trees. Just silence and stillness. The lake appeared suddenly through the breaks in the trees, its surface a vast, shimmering expanse of ice reflecting the faint glow of the crescent moon. The sight was both beautiful and unnerving, the kind of beauty that felt untouched by time but carried an underlying sense of danger. "Looks solid," Eric said, his breath fogging in the frigid air as we stepped closer. Noah picked up a rock from the snowy shore, his gloved hand brushing off the powder. "Let's test it," he said with a grin before launching the rock onto the frozen surface. The sound echoed across the stillness as it landed with a dull thud. We all stood there, holding our breath, waiting for something. A crack, a groan, anything. But the ice held firm, unyielding. "Guess it's safe," Noah said, tossing another rock farther out. "Come on." Against better judgment, we ventured onto the ice. It felt solid underfoot, its glassy surface slippery but thick enough to hold our weight. We didn't go too far, maybe 100 feet from the edge, but it was enough to feel cut off from the rest of the world. The shoreline grew distant, the trees now nothing more than dark silhouettes against the horizon. The stillness around us was absolute, the kind that made you hyper-aware of every sound, the crunch of snow beneath boots, the faint hum of your own breathing, and the persistent, unshakable echo of silence. We were joking about something trivial, probably Eric's terrible aim with the rocks, when Noah suddenly fell quiet. "What's wrong?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the opposite side of the lake. My gaze followed his hand, and that's when I saw it. Something large and dark was moving near the treeline. At first, it was hard to make out, just a shadow among shadows. But as it shifted closer to the ice, the moonlight caught it, and the shape became clearer. My breath caught in my throat. It was massive, easily larger than any animal I'd ever seen. Its movements were slow and deliberate, almost lumbering, and its hunched silhouette gave the impression of a bear. For a moment, that's exactly what I thought it was. "Is that a bear?" Eric whispered, his voice barely audible. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a tightness that mirrored the growing tension in my chest. I couldn't answer. My pulse was pounding too loudly in my ears, drowning out coherent thought. I tried to focus on the figure to make sense of what I was seeing, but something about it felt wrong. The proportions were off. The way it moved was unnatural, almost mechanical, like someone in a poorly fitted costume. Noah took a step back, his boots skidding slightly on the ice. "Guys, that's not a bear." His words sent a chill through me, colder than the night air. The figure stopped at the edge of the lake, its massive form silhouetted against the trees. For a moment, everything was still. Then it moved again, stepping onto the ice. The sound was subtle at first, a faint creak, barely audible, but it grew louder as the figure advanced. With each step, the ice groaned in protest, the sound reverberating across the frozen expanse. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. Eric nodded, his wide eyes locked on the figure. But Noah didn't move. He was staring at it, his brow furrowed, as if trying to decipher something just out of reach. "Wait," he said finally. "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears, and that's when I caught it. A faint, rhythmic thumping, almost like Footsteps. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't an animal. It was walking. The figure stopped abruptly, its head tilting slightly as if it had heard us. The movement was unnervingly human, and yet it felt alien. Slowly it turned toward us. My breath hitched as the moonlight caught its face, or what should have been a face. Instead, it was flat, featureless, and smooth, like the blank surface of a mask. Panic surged through me. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Noah's arm. The three of us turned and bolted, our boots slipping and sliding on the ice as we sprinted back toward the shore. Behind us, the groaning of the ice grew louder, accompanied by the relentless thumping of footsteps. We didn't look back. We couldn't. The only thing that mattered was reaching the safety of the trees before whatever that thing was caught up to us. The night, once so silent, was now filled with the chaotic echoes of our escape, the sound of our ragged breaths mingling with the terrifying creaks and cracks of the ice. As the figure moved closer to the lake, my unease deepened. Something about it was undeniably wrong. This gait was unnatural, too upright, too deliberate. The lumbering movements that had initially seemed animalistic now felt disturbingly human. It dragged something behind it, the object obscured by the curtain of falling snow. My breath hitched as the figure straightened fully, emerging from the shadows like a specter. It wasn't a bear. It was a person, dressed in what could only be described as a crude, tattered bear suit. "What the hell?" Noah whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. The words barely registered in my mind, drowned out by the cacophony of thoughts racing through my head. The suit was grotesque, patched together with uneven fur and what looked like strips of leather. The headpiece hung slightly askew, exposing pale skin beneath it. Whatever this person was dragging behind them left a faint trail in the snow, and as they shifted, I caught a clearer glimpse. It was a small black bag, tightly knotted and trailing behind on a coarse rope. The sight sent a jolt of pure terror through me. What was in the bag? Why were they dragging it? I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and leave, to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ice, my body frozen in place. Fear gripped me like a vice. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios, each one more horrifying than the last. Eric's hand on my shoulder snapped me out of my paralysis. I turned to find him and Noah already retreating toward the shore, their movements slow and cautious, as if afraid to make any sudden noise. My legs finally obeyed, and I followed, the icy air slicing through my lungs with every breath. The crunch of snow beneath our boots sounded deafening in the oppressive silence of the lake. We hadn't gone far when a voice shattered the stillness. "Hey!" it called, sharp and commanding. My blood ran cold. The voice came from behind us, deep and guttural, carrying an edge of menace. I didn't look back. None of us did. Instinct took over and we broke into a run. The cold air stung my face as we sprinted toward the safety of the shore. My lungs burned with every gasp, and the snow seemed to claw at my boots, dragging me down. The frozen surface of the lake amplified the sound of our escape, the rapid crunch of boots on snow echoing like a drumbeat in the vast emptiness. My heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out everything else. I didn't know if the man was following us. I didn't dare look. Eric stumbled ahead of me, his footing slipping on the slick ice. He caught himself before falling, but the momentary stumble sent a jolt of panic through all of us. "Keep going," I shouted, though my own voice felt foreign in the chaos of the moment. Noah was ahead, his breaths visible in the frigid air as he pushed forward with everything he had. The treeline loomed closer, the sparse cluster of trees offering the promise of cover. It was the only thing keeping us moving, the faint hope that we could lose him in the woods. The lake felt endless, its expanse stretching far beyond what our legs could endure. My chest heaved, the cold slicing through my throat like shards of glass, but stopping wasn't an option. "Is he following us?" Eric shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't look back," I yelled, fear tightening around my chest like a noose. I didn't know if the man was behind us, but the weight of his presence was suffocating. Every creak of the ice, every gust of wind felt like him closing the distance. Finally, we reached the edge of the lake. The uneven ground beneath the snow offered some traction, and we dove into the cover of the trees without hesitation. The thick trunks and low-hanging branches became our allies, shielding us from view. We slowed slightly, our breaths coming in ragged gasps as we pressed deeper into the woods. The silence returned, but it was no longer comforting. It was oppressive, filled with the weight of what we had just seen. I strained my ears, listening for any sound of pursuit. The crack of a branch, the crunch of snow, anything to signal that the man had followed us. But there was nothing, just the wind whispering through the trees and the distant echo of our panicked breaths. Noah leaned against a tree, his hands on his knees as he tried to catch his breath. "What was that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. None of us had an answer. Eric shook his head, his face pale and glistening with sweat despite the freezing air. "That suit, that bag," I began, but the words felt meaningless. What explanation could possibly make sense of what we had just witnessed? "Do you think he—" Eric's voice trailed off, but we all knew what he was implying. "Do you think he saw us? Do you think he'll come after us?" The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. "We need to keep moving," I said finally, forcing my legs to cooperate. "The parking lot's not far." The thought of safety propelled us forward, though none of us felt truly safe anymore. The woods grew thicker as we pushed through, the underbrush clawing at our clothes. Every shadow felt alive, every noise a threat. My mind replayed the image of the man in the bare suit, his unnatural movements, the bag dragging behind him. What was in it? Why was he out there? When we finally reached the parking lot, it felt like emerging from a nightmare. The sight of our car, frosted over but intact, was a relief I couldn't put into words. But even as we climbed inside and locked the doors, the fear didn't fade. The man was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, and we had no idea what he was capable of. By the time we reached the edge of the lake, we were gasping for air, our breaths visible in the freezing night like ghostly wisps. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, making my legs tremble, though whether it was from the run or the fear, I couldn't tell. For a moment, none of us said a word. The three of us hunched over, clutching our knees, trying to regain some semblance of control. The icy wind howled around us, cutting through our heavy jackets, but even its bite couldn't distract us from the terror lingering in the air. "Let's go," Noah whispered, his voice hoarse. Without another word, we trudged toward the parking lot, each step heavier than the last. The crunch of snow beneath our boots was deafening in the otherwise silent forest. My head was spinning with unanswered questions, each more unsettling than the last. Who was that man? What was in the bag? And why was he out there, alone in a bare suit? When we finally reached the car, Noah fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling so badly that it took him 3 tries to unlock the door. The moment we climbed inside, he started the engine, and we peeled out of the lot. The tires crunched over the icy gravel, and the headlights cut through the dense darkness of the trees. None of us spoke. The tension in the car was palpable, a suffocating weight that pressed down on my chest. For what felt like an eternity, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional squeak of Noah's gloves on the steering wheel. My mind replayed the scene on the lake in vivid detail, each memory more haunting than the last. The way the man had moved, the guttural shout, the smooth, featureless mask beneath the bare head. It was all burned into my brain, refusing to let go. Finally, Eric broke the silence. "Maybe it was just someone dumping trash," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Trying to avoid getting caught. Maybe that's why he was acting so weird." I shook my head, the frustration bubbling over. In a bare suit? In the middle of winter? Come on, Eric. That doesn't make any sense. "I'm just saying," he muttered defensively. "It's better than thinking, I don't know, something worse." Noah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What if it was a body?" he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "The bag. It wasn't that big." But his voice trailed off, and I could tell he didn't want to finish the thought. Neither did I. It was too small for that, I said, though my voice was unconvincing even to my own ears. The image of the bag flashed in my mind. Small, black, tightly tied. It didn't seem large enough to hold a person, but the way it dragged, heavy and deliberate, suggested something far more sinister than garbage. We spent the rest of the drive speculating, throwing out theories that grew more outlandish as the miles passed. None of them fit. Every explanation left us with more questions than answers. By the time we reached town, we were exhausted, too mentally drained to keep guessing. Noah dropped me off at home first, and as I climbed out of the car, the cold night air felt heavier than before. I gave a half-hearted wave before trudging inside, my mind still racing. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled onto something we weren't meant to see. The image of the man in the bear suit haunted my dreams, his featureless mask looming over me like a specter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bag dragging behind him, leaving a faint trail in the snow. I told myself it was just a creepy encounter, nothing more, but deep down, I knew better. The unease reached a tipping point when I saw the news a week later. My mom had the TV on in the living room while she folded laundry, and I wasn't paying much attention until a familiar name caught my ear. I turned to see a reporter standing outside a wooded area, her breath fogging in the freezing air. She was talking about a missing child, a young boy from our area who had disappeared around the same time we visited the lake. The photo they showed on the screen made my stomach drop. Authorities are asking for any information regarding the child's whereabouts, the reporter said. He was last seen wearing a red jacket and blue snow boots. Red jacket, blue snow boots. My mind flashed back to the lake, to the small black bag the man had dragged behind him. I felt sick. Could there be a connection? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the timing, the location, it was too much to ignore. My hands shook as I turned off the TV, the reporter's voice cutting off mid-sentence. I called Noah and Eric immediately, relaying what I had seen. They were just as unsettled as I was, though none of us wanted to say what we were all thinking. Could that bag have held? No, it couldn't be, but the thought refused to leave my mind. We reported everything we saw to the police the next day. They took our statements seriously, though their expressions betrayed a mix of skepticism and concern. The officer who interviewed me assured me they would look into it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our story sounded too bizarre to believe. Days turned into weeks, and the missing child's case remained unsolved. The man in the bear suit was never found. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that encounter in my mind, trying to make sense of it. Was it just a disturbing coincidence? Or did we stumble onto something far darker than we could comprehend? I'll probably never know. But one thing is certain. That night at the lake changed me. The world feels different now, less safe. And the memory of that featureless mask, staring blankly from the shadows, will haunt me forever.